what other women are by what other women say and by what other women are doing. And so, as we grasp the torch again and hoist the banner, may we also heed the admonition of Alice Paul to live so as to feel no torturing regret for years without purpose. Thank you. Questions? Yes.
How many people were on the Republican Platform Committee? How many women were on that committee? And how did, well, I know how you felt, but with the platform, your reaction?
I can tell you exactly, because the rules of our party require that there be one man and one woman from every state and territory that's represented there. And that alternates do not serve. They must be a man and a woman from the official delegation of every state. So they would be equal numbers, and that would be approximately. I've forgotten, there are a couple of territories that are represented there, but it would be the number of states and territories times 2. Now, what was the other part of your question?
I want to know how many women, so that were...
It's half and half. Well, I didn't feel good. I felt it was pretty predictable what would happen, but it probably was more rigid than perhaps I had expected, and the one hopeful thing about the platform that I think is that those issues will all be joined again. Really, there was more story in Dallas at the Republican National Convention about 88 than was about 84. And so that when the election is over, other women and men will be maneuvering for positions of power within our party. And in order to do that, they will discuss all of these issues again. It didn't lay issues aside, in my opinion. It guaranteed that they will be debated. And I think that that's a healthy thing. There are some good things in the platform. I did not come to make a partisan speech, but there are some. There's a fairly good plank on environment. We got in a statement about additional help for handicapped, disabled. It's not, it isn't, but on women's equality, I really was very disappointed. I was disappointed in 80 when they took out support for the Equal Rights Amendment. As you all know, I have no hesitation in telling you these things. The world knows how I felt. And so I have to tell you that I think it was a very rigid, tightly devised platform, and particularly in those areas and on social issues. But I'm hopeful that people will, the pendulum swings, and if it swings too far one way, it has a tendency to swing back to the center, and I'm hoping that that's what will happen. Yes?
The pendulum sort of hovers over the Supreme Court, and the next president will potentially be appointing quite a few Supreme Court justices. What impact do you think this will have on the women's movement if Ronald Reagan is reelected?
Well, the appointments of the justices to the Supreme Court have a tremendous impact on our life in any area, as far as that's concerned. How responsive they are to the opinions in a country, they're not, I realize that it's non-political, but whether the swing of the pendulum would affect that, I don't know. Perhaps it would be possible to convince the administration that it needn't go any farther to the right. I think I shall be lending my voice to that effort. And I think that there are other Republicans that will. We don't know whether there will be appointments to the Supreme Court or not. But it appears that probably they will. And if it follows the pattern of the Grove City thing, as we are seeing it influencing the enforcement and regulations of Title IX, I would hate to see those things being narrowed down or freedoms eroded any more than they are, and that is a real concern for some people. Yes. Yes.
You've described an organized resistance to the women's movement that you call backlash, as Gloria Steinem did last night. Do you think it's just that, or do you think there's a more fundamental change in the process?
I think probably in a sense we're saying the same thing, of a backlash to it. I think there are some fundamental changes in this country. I have to acknowledge that, and I think we saw them beginning in the late 1970s, that there was a legitimate swing to conservative philosophy. I think it was a genuine movement toward that, and I think it came in response to perhaps an oppressiveness of government, maybe too much burden of taxation, too much intrusion by government into people's lives. I think there was a reaction to some of the programs that caused a legitimate move to the right. Then I think that you saw some single interest groups that had a tendency to take advantage of that and latch onto it and use it for their own purposes, that took it even farther to the right. But I think that the backlash that you're seeing is that there's a growing amount of sentiment in favor of many of the things that we're talking about the concept of equality. I quoted to you from Mr. White's book that it's just a basic concept in this country, and the support that there is for the Equal Rights Amendment. And we've made our point. Women and minorities have made a lot of progress. And that there is a following, there is a support for that in this country that's rather strong. So then you see groups that, as I pointed out, I believe, have political or economic interests saying this is going too far. And that's, of course, then the backlash that you're getting, I think. So in a sense, it's a combination of the two. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Could you try and explain the dynamic that operates in women in your party or in any party who seem to be operating against their own best interests?
Like what?
Like the women on that platform committee who may have voted not to have the Equal Rights Amendment in it, and the Canadian and so on.
Can you hear the question? Yeah, okay. They don't believe they're operating against their own best interests.
That's the part I don't understand.
Well, sometimes I don't understand it either, but I think you have to recognize that if we are 53% of the population, women, that is not a monolithic group. Just as there are liberals, conservatives, and moderates within the male population, there are within the women's population. So I think that that's frequently the fact that we overlook when we analyze that so-called women's vote. Now, the gender gap, I think, applies to a lot of other things besides just the vote. It's a difference in values, it's a difference in attitudes, it's in concerns and some compassionate concern about social issues that we see more among women. But so, as I saw the women at that convention, I cannot find it in my heart to be critical because there were conservative women at that convention. All my life I've talked about getting women just women active in the political process. The same as I talk about men getting active. You can't go around urging people to, just the people that agree with you, to get active. So, I think that's the thing that sometimes we forget. So it seems to me that it's a matter of education, that it's one of the reasons that I put so much emphasis on women's history. That the women's movement is not a radical, revolutionary, out of this world kind of thing. For instance, I don't understand why the Equal Rights Amendment isn't the best conservative issue in the country. All my life as a conservative Republican, I've talked about individual freedom, individual opportunity, individual responsibility, individual freedom. That's the heart of the Equal Rights Amendment, is all those things for women. I mean, it's the same way with the civil rights. Those ought to be good, traditionally classic conservative issues. So maybe what we need to do is educate, is to plead, arm twist, do whatever we can get to do to have people see it in a different light. But I must say to you that in looking at the whole of the political process, you have to recognize that there are all kinds of opinions, not only among women, but among men as well. Yes?
Did you go see Gloria last night?
Yes, I did.
What did you do outrageous today?
Probably some of the things I've said here tonight. Did you do something outrageous?
I haven't figured out anything really good yet, but tonight is still young. You might tell these young ladies that are here what she said.
Well, her book, of course, is Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions. And at the close of her lecture last night, she said, that what a wonderful thing it would be if we'd all go out of there and do something absolutely outrageous, that it would change the world around. And I think one example she used was if it was nothing more than turning to him and saying, "Pick him up yourself." And she was going to try to think of something outrageous to do, and she encouraged everybody there to do the same. She was wonderful as usual, and when I talk about the spirit kind of feminism and a closeness that develops between people that have either been touched by it or want to be touched by it, as she has often said. I went to her 50th birthday party in New York, and it was exciting, and it was a really emotional experience to have that many people in a room, having come together from all over the country and experiencing this kind of having been touched or wanting to respond to a person. She has, whether you agree with everything she says or not, she certainly has been an emotional impetus for people in the women's movement, both men and women, I think. Yes.
What did you think of the Mondale-Reagan debate? Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. I watched it because technically, it's become part of our political campaign cycle, and I think that from a professional politician's point of view, the mechanics of it is interesting to watch. I wasn't sure that those of us that follow a campaign closely would probably learn anything more about the issues, and I think generally speaking, you didn't. I think the issues that were highlighted have always been there, but I think it put them in a different context. I think that Mondale had a lot to prove, and I think he did it. I think he performed extremely well, and I think that it will focus a great deal of attention on the next debate. I think that I don't know that the gap is so large. I think it probably will have narrowed as it would for most challengers under that circumstance, putting him on a platform with the president. I think that those things have all been discussed many times over. So I think you probably will see a narrowing of the issues. I think most observers believe that will happen. But I think that the next two debates will be watched with a great deal of attention.
There's been a lot of debate between journalists and other people in this country about the safeness of the president and the way he is kind of cloistered. And during the debate, he was not cloistered. And I'm wondering, what was your impression of Reagan's performance? Was that an unusual manner for him to I mean, he faltered, he floundered in a lot of areas, and I'm just curious of what your impression of him was. Was that unusual for him? Was he just having a bad day, as the Larry Speake said? Or
I don't see Mr. Reagan very often, so I have a hard time making that kind of judgment. I thought that he scored some points with the economy, which is the very strong part of it, and with which I agree. I like some things that I see happening in the economy, and I think that that is the issue that probably is going to be controlling in this election. But I really am not that close. I don't see him, except as you all do, to really make a judgment about how he is from how that compares to a day-by-day performance. I don't know. Any other questions? Yes?
I'd just like to let people know if you're not registered to vote yet, there's still time to do so. You can register until, I believe, 27th of October, either at room 57 of the Union or the YWCA in Alumni Hall, perfectly orange. And even if you are registered in another state, sometimes it's a real hassle to get the absentee ballot. All you have to do is live in Iowa for 10 days, and you can register here and vote in the national and the congressional and Senate elections here. I encourage you all to register.
Are there any other questions? Anybody have any other announcements, as Gloria asked for last night?
I have one more question to ask you. How do you feel the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is doing now that you've left? How's their performance? Have they wandered off?
The tragedy of the Civil Rights Commission experience was not that I did not go back on, or not that Jill Ruckelshaus did not go back on. The tragedy of that whole thing was, in my opinion, the lack of understanding of the role of the commission. And if I believe that the role of the commission is to be a watchdog, to be the conscience of this country, then I see some shortcomings now with what the commission is doing, with the present makeup. But I do also acknowledge, as a practical person, that if that's the way the administration wants it to be, I guess that's their prerogative. But the tragedy is, I think, in my opinion, is that the role of that commission is interpreted the way that it is. The Civil Rights Commission has never made any president of either party happy. It's because they have told the story as they see it. And if there are shortcomings, if they have to recommend that this is being done wrong or that this needs to be done differently, they have done that. And they've made some very harsh reports. But there's a way of making a harsh report without attacking personally. And it was not intended that way. Our reports were not intended that way. But apparently that was not what the advice that the president got. I don't think he bears any ill will against the people that were not reappointed. I think that he got some very bad advice. Yeah.
Pardon me for asking a somewhat partisan question, but as a party activist, it's been known that you'll take a different stand on use of the Republican Party. How do some of us as young Republican women answer the issue when we're asked the question many times, how can you be a woman and be a Republican in this administration and move forward in the 1980s? How do you answer that question?
Well, I had to answer it this afternoon as best I could. I'm a lifelong Republican, and you know, I understand party discipline. And I think I see the young woman back there that asked me a follow-up question about this afternoon, and I don't want to leave the same misunderstanding that I may have left. That there's nothing into party affiliation but discipline. That's not so. You either are a Democrat or you are a Republican because you believe in certain things. And I made that decision very early on. And those things still have a great deal of meaning to me. People used to ask me, what's the difference between a Republican and a Democrat? And I think I've often answered, you know, that I think there are a lot of things that Democrats and Republicans want the same. They want a home of their own, and they want clean air, and they want clean water, and they want to be safe on the streets, and they want their country to be proud and strong. And I think sometimes it's more how it's accomplished in the past than anything else. It's where you put your reliance, on big government or on government in Washington or closer to the people or whatever. But it's all of those things all wrapped up into one. I believe very deeply in the principles of the individual, as I just described to you a few moments ago. That's one of the reasons that I was a Republican. So over the years, as I exercised my partisanship to promote those beliefs, I got a lot invested in the party. I've got a lot at stake, as many of you do in whatever party you belong to. So, you know, now I guess that my thrust of my participation now will be to try to change it, to bring it back. And to bring it back to what I believe is the traditional Republican positions. And I'm not going to change it by dropping out. I'm not going to change it by dropping out. And besides, I think the Republican Party needs women like me and like you worse now than they ever have. And I'm a deep believer in the two-party system, you see. I don't want to see all the women in one party. And I think the same can be said to a certain degree about blacks in the Democratic Party. I think it would be a better balance if you had minorities and women represented in both of those great parties. Although I have to say to you that I understand the difficulty as well. I understand why they are not. When you look at some of the history of the things that have happened in more recent years, and we can go back to the great history of Republican civil rights, as you can with women. But that has to be constant. It isn't enough to just say, this is the way we used to be. We need to live up to that heritage. And I will be there trying to do that as long as there's breath in my body. Yes?
You said the Republican Party needs the women. I couldn't agree with you more. You've not run for elected office.
No.
Why not? Has the Iowa Republican Party never approached you, or didn't you want it, and why can't I have you instead of Terry Brandt?
Well, a long time ago, when I was up in north central Iowa, I considered running for public office. There was going to be a vacancy in the House of Representatives, and I gave some serious thought to it. And just about that time, we moved to Des Moines for a variety of reasons, both business and personal. My husband sold his medical practice up there, and we moved to Des Moines. So the only elective office I've ever run for is Board of Education up in Wright County, Iowa, in Eagle Grove. And I ran for one term and served that, ran for another term and did not run again. So when I went to Des Moines, you obviously can't run for the House of Representatives when you've just moved into a district. Your constituency changes. And so that's the year that I ran for National Committee Woman. And I chose, at that fork in the road, I chose the organizational end of it. And Yes, people have asked me to run for office, but I've considered it and rejected it. I liked what I was doing. I liked the organizational end of politics, and I will not run for office now. I mean, that part of my career is past. If I were going to have done it, you would have done it much sooner. So I'm not a legislative person. I'm interested in issues, but I'm not a legislative person, which I think sometimes makes a difference in what you want to do. But that's about all I can tell you, is that I just made the decision. It isn't that I have been ignored.
Could you explain that? You're not a legislative person, but
I don't seem to have any great desire to hammer out legislation or write legislation or go through whatever it is that you go through, the research that has to be done. And it's more than just having an opinion on an issue. You are writing laws and writing legislation, and I can't tell you why. I can only tell you that just never has had. I have the most admiration for people that do it, and people that are attentive to that kind of detail, but that just never has been my thing. Any others?
there's a couple of things I've been reading in the paper about some proposed amendments to the Constitution. One is the prayer in school, which has been brought up, and the other one is the balanced budget. There's an amendment. They want an amendment in the Constitution that will force force Congress to balance the budget.
Uh-huh.
What do you think of the balanced budget amendment first? What do you think of the school and prayer amendment?
I'm
second?
against both.
Against both. Are you against tampering with the Constitution in such like manner, or is it just those two issues?
My experience has shown me, and in visiting with a great many people on the prayer amendment, I don't like the crossover between the church and in schools, church and state. I just think that the division is there, and I think we should adhere to it. I have all kinds of problems. I'm a Christian, and I live a Christian life, and I pray, but I don't know who would write my prayer for me. I just feel like that's a private part of me that I would rather do, and not be saying to a schoolroom of children that you have to, or do it now, or do it then, or don't do it at all if you don't. I just don't see how it could possibly work. On the balanced budget, my experience leads me to believe that you can do almost anything you want to do with figures. And I'm not sure that saying we have to have a balance. We have that in Iowa, that we can't run a deficit, don't we? Somebody? Yeah. There's a lot of maneuvering, a lot of can go on. But if you really wanted a balanced budget, it seems to me, you'd send over a balanced budget and you'd pass it. And I don't know. I just have trouble thinking that writing it down is going to assure a balanced budget, because you can do all kinds of imaginative bookkeeping. I can unbalance or balance my budget any day of the week. I'm getting myself into trouble on some of these. I'm getting more outrageous. Yes.
You're talking about party discipline and party loyalty, which is a personal question that I'm asking of you, since you said you were feeling honored. Do you have a crossover when you vote, or do you pull a straight lever?
I used to really have the most dynamic speeches about pulling a straight lever, but I recognize that most people do not, and that is, of course, the way that you exercise a degree of independence within the party structure. I'm not going to go back and review my voting record. I'm a pretty straight voter. But there is, of course, that option, either not voting, crossing over, or writing in. And that is built into our system to give you that kind of flexibility. Okay? Thank you very much.
There is a reception at Slash House, and everyone's really invited to come over and attend. We also have Rosie Gowdy coming on Saturday night to Dugan's Deli. She'll start singing at 9 o'clock, and we hope you all come there. And Minette Doder will be in this room tomorrow night at 6 o'clock to talk on women in the economy. Thank you.
I